Alabama pines looked like they were covered by a shroud in the fall of 1887. This logging settlement used to be prosperous, but it was already starting to fade into obscurity when Evelyn Crowe disappeared from the Crowe family estate on October 17th. It was located between Lookout Mountain and the winding Coosa River. The estate was on the edge of town, and it was a Victorian building that was losing its grandeur. It was on Whispering Hill, which looked out over acres of dense pine forest that gave the settlement its name. The Baldwin County Historical Society's archives show that the disappearance was not reported right away. There is a strange gap in all official records. It took almost 3 weeks for Sheriff Augustus Morgan to get formal notice. The first report, which was filed on the 8th of November, 1887, has a strange note in the margin that says, "Family claims absence noticed only yesterday. Inquiry to continue privately." In the spring of 1880, the Crowe family moved to Alabama Pines. Bartholomew Crowe, a businessman from Boston who was interested in developing railroads and lumber, bought the estate from the descendants of the original owner, who had given it up after going broke after the Civil War. Crowe paid a lot less than what the property was worth, according to public records. People in the area talked and speculated about the property for years before it was sold. We should talk about the estate itself because its architecture and location will be important to our understanding of what happened later. Zechariah Pendleton, a cotton merchant, built the house in 1858. It had 3 floors and an attic, for a total of 17 rooms. The design was in the Italianate style that was popular at the time. It had a square central tower that rose above the main building, bracketed eaves, and narrow arched windows. The property had a main house, a carriage house about 50 yards behind it, a small gardener's cottage, and a storage shed that used to be slave quarters before the war. The property's most unique feature was its seclusion, even though it was technically inside the town limits. A long, winding road led to Whispering Hill. Old pines lined the road and blocked the view of the house until you were almost there. The back of the property was right next to thick forests that went on for miles without a break, all the way to the foothills of Lookout Mountain. Jeremiah Collins, a local historian, wrote in his 1912 book Forgotten Corners of Alabama that the Pendleton estate, later the Crowe House, seems to have been built for privacy, giving its residents a place to watch the town below without being seen. Bartholomew brought his wife Josephine, his younger brother Montgomery, and his daughter Evelyn with him. The small town was very excited when the family arrived. Everyone said they were quiet and kept to themselves most of the time. In her diary from June 1880, Millicent Hargrove wrote, "The new family at Whispering Hill has arrived with trunks and furniture enough for a small army, yet they employ no local help, save for old Mr. Pickett, who tends their grounds. The daughter, a pale thing who must be near 20, seems forbidden to venture beyond the gates unaccompanied." You can find more information about the family in different community records. Bartholomew Crowe was a tall, scary man with a full beard that he kept very neat. He was in his mid-40s when he came to Alabama Pines, and he walked with the stiff posture of someone who was used to being in charge. His wife Josephine was a lot younger, maybe 30, and always seemed worried. She wore the most fashionable clothes in Boston, but people in the area said they were too much for the weather and the settlement's casual atmosphere. Town records say that Montgomery Crowe was of scholarly disposition and frail constitution and didn't leave the estate grounds very often. People in town who talked to him said he was thin, nervous, and spoke softly. They also said he avoided looking people in the eye. According to Dr. Harrison Powell's medical records, Montgomery had nervous exhaustion and weak lungs, which supposedly meant he had to move to the southern climate, and we hardly ever saw Evelyn, the person we were looking into. The few descriptions we have make it sound like she was a young woman in her 20s with dark hair that she usually wore in a strict style. She dressed simply, almost plainly, unlike her stepmother. Parish records show that she only went to church twice in the first year the family lived in town. Both times, she was noted to have been quiet the whole time and did not sing hymns or talk to other people after the service. The Crowes quickly set up a routine that kept them from interacting with the townspeople as much as possible. Bartholomew went on business trips a lot, and sometimes he would be gone for months at a time. Montgomery took care of the family's business while his brother was away, even though he was said to be in poor health. Josephine went to church services every now and then, but she turned down all invitations to social events. Evelyn was kept almost completely alone. An article in the Alabama Pines Gazette from December 1880 said that the few people who did meet Evelyn said she was unusually quiet and had a gaze that seemed to look through a person instead of at them. Dr. Harrison Powell, the town doctor who treated Montgomery's long-term breathing problems, wrote in his medical log that he had only seen Evelyn twice during his many visits to the estate. His entry from February 1882 says, "Miss Crowe seems to be in good physical health, but she is very subdued. When she is spoken to, she responds with precise, measured phrases that sound like they were rehearsed instead of spontaneous." A strange addition to Powell's notes can be found in private letters he wrote to a medical colleague in Nashville. In a letter from March 1882, he said, "The most strange thing about the young woman is how she acts when her father comes into the room. She shows no signs of warmth or even recognition. Instead, she has a studied blankness that seems performative to me." He also said, "When he called her daughter, I saw what I can only call a momentary resistance before she acknowledged the term." During the years between the Crowe's arrival and Evelyn's disappearance, she became more and more alone. The family slowly pulled away from community life even more. By 1885, they had fired their groundskeeper. Mr. Pickett and Montgomery took care of all the town's business, making quick, efficient trips to buy what they needed. Josephine stopped going to church altogether. Bartholomew missed more and more time. According to the town ledger from 1886, the Crowes paid their taxes and property taxes through a lawyer in Birmingham instead of going to the town hall. Wilson Jeff, the town clerk, wrote in the record book, "Unusual arrangement, family becoming more and more strange, possible financial problems." There were signs that the Crowe family's money problems were getting worse. State archives have banking records that show Bartholomew made a number of large withdrawals in 1884 and 1885, followed by a number of loans secured by the estate. His lumber business, which had brought him to Alabama in the first place, was failing because the easiest-to-reach trees had already been cut down and new railroad lines were going around Alabama pines to find more profitable routes. During this time, the few times townspeople saw life at the Crowe estate suggested that things were getting worse. Sarah Tilley, who lived next to the lower part of the Crowe land, said she sometimes heard people yelling from the top of the hill, but she could never make out what they were saying. Caleb Green, the delivery boy for Abernathy's General Store, told about an event that happened in late 1886 when he brought supplies to the kitchen door. The missus opened the door just a little bit, just enough to pass the money through. Behind her, I could hear a man yelling something fierce, but it stopped suddenly when he heard the door. The missus's hand was shaking so badly that she dropped 2 coins before she could give me the money. Several things happened in the months before Evelyn went missing that, looking back, seem important. In April 1887, Dr. Powell was called to the estate to treat Evelyn, who had fallen and hurt herself slightly. His medical notes, which were found decades later when his old office was being renovated, contain a troubling observation. Patient reluctant to explain circumstances of injury. Bruising pattern inconsistent with reported fall downstairs. Mrs. Crowe present throughout examination, answering all questions directed at patient. In a subsequent entry dated 2 days later, Powell wrote, "Conscience compels me to record my suspicions, though professional discretion prevents their public disclosure." The injuries observed on Miss Crowe, particularly the symmetrical bruising at wrists and ankles, suggest restraint rather than accident. Her expression as I departed haunts me still. In early May 1887, Reverend Carlton Jenkins, the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Alabama Pines, made an unplanned visit to the Crowe estate. He never said publicly why he was there, but his private journal, which he gave to the church archives after his death in 1910, has this strange entry. Called upon the Crowe household today following the troubling anonymous note placed in the collection plate on Sunday last, was received by Mr. Montgomery, who listened politely to my general inquiries regarding his family's spiritual welfare, but grew markedly agitated when I mentioned ensuring the well-being of all members of his household. He assured me all were well, though declined my request to offer a prayer with the entire family present. As I departed, I believed I observed a face at the upper window, female, pale, though it vanished when I turned to look directly. A traveling photographer came to Alabama Pines in June. Augustus Mercer made a living taking pictures of the homes of rich families in the South and selling them pictures of people and property. The University of Alabama archives have his business ledger, which shows that he had an appointment at the Crowe estate on the 7th of June, 1887. The entry is crossed out with a note that says, "Appointment canceled upon arrival. Man claiming to be head of household Younger, not Bartholomew, agitated by my presence. Requested immediate departure. No payment received." That same year, in July, several people saw Montgomery Crowe having a loud fight with a stranger at the Pines Inn, the only hotel in town. The hotel register says that the man said he was James Harrington from Savannah. He stayed for 3 nights before suddenly leaving. There is no record of what he was doing in Alabama Pines, but rumors said he was either a private investigator or a creditor looking for money. Later, Lydia Winters, a chambermaid at the inn, said she had heard parts of the fight between Montgomery and Harrington. The man from Savannah said something about a picture and being certain of recognition, according to her. Mr. Crowe called him a fraud and said he would call the police if he didn't pay up. The man from Savannah laughed and said, "I am not the one keeping secrets that would hang a man, Mr. Crowe." He also said, "They noticed me then and stopped talking." About 6 weeks before Evelyn went missing, on the 3rd of September, 1887, the night watchman Silas Webb said he heard a woman's long scream coming from the direction of the Crowe estate. When he got closer to the property to look into it, he saw lights moving between the old carriage house and the main house. I called out, saying I was the night watch. Montgomery Crowe came out of the carriage house with a lantern and said they had been having problems with raccoons in their stores, and that the noise I heard was probably an animal caught in their trap. He thanked me for my concern, but said he didn't need any help. Webb, on the other hand, was still upset about what had happened. Webb told Sheriff Morgan a few days later, in notes, that Morgan kept for himself, that he didn't believe Montgomery's story. "I've heard raccoons caught in traps, Sheriff. They don't sound like a woman fearing for her life." An encounter in early October, just days before Evelyn disappeared, may have been the most telling. Hester Jameson, who ran the town's small post office, later said that Evelyn came to her counter alone, which had never happened before, and tried to send a letter. Jameson's statement said that she seemed upset and kept looking over her shoulder. There was no return address on the letter, only the letter E in the corner. Before she could think about it, Mrs. Crowe came in and grabbed the letter, saying there had been a mistake. Miss Evelyn didn't say anything, but her face was like that of a trapped animal, and Jameson would never forget it. The letter was never sent. We still don't know what it says or who it was meant for. Jameson also said that Josephine Crowe whispered harshly to Evelyn as she led her away from the post office, "He will know. He always knows. Do you want him to punish all of us?" This conversation was not in Jameson's official statement to Sheriff Morgan, but it was found in a letter she wrote to her sister in Birmingham and was found among family papers in 1935. Evelyn Crowe went missing on the 17th of October, 1887. The family later said that they had gone to bed like they always did. Josephine went to wake up her daughter the next morning, but when she got there, Evelyn's bed was empty and she hadn't slept in it. Her clothes were still in the closet, and it didn't look like anything of hers was missing. But, as was said before, the family didn't say anything about this missing person for almost 3 weeks. When asked why there was a delay, Montgomery said they thought Evelyn had gone to stay with family in Mobile and only started to worry when they didn't hear back from her. There has never been any proof of relatives in Mobile or any letters like that. At best, Sheriff Morgan's first investigation was only a quick look. His notes say that he talked to the family and looked around the grounds for a short time, but he didn't find any signs of foul play. The case file has this assessment: family seems appropriately worried. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Miss Crowe likely left on her own, maybe to escape the isolation of her situation. The case will stay open until she returns or more information comes in. Sheriff Morgan had personal ties to the Crowe family that may have affected how he handled the case. The town's financial records show that Bartholomew Crowe gave a lot of money to Morgan's campaign for re-election the year before. Morgan's brother-in-law also got a job with one of Bartholomew's lumber businesses in a nearby county. The investigation might have stopped there, another strange disappearance in a remote area that was eventually forgotten, if Bartholomew Crowe hadn't come back from a business trip to New Orleans on November 12, 4 days after the disappearance was reported. Witnesses at the train station said that his reaction when he found out what was going on was not what they expected. Instead of showing shock or sadness, he got angry and yelled at Montgomery in public before hiring a private carriage to take him right to the estate. Station Master Frederick Donovan told the Birmingham Examiner about the scene, which published a short article about the case on November 20. Mr. Crowe turned a shade of purple I've never seen on a living man. He grabbed his brother by the lapels and shook him hard, saying over and over, "What have you done? What have you done? Mr." Montgomery seemed to shrink before our eyes, stammering that it wasn't his fault that she had become unmanageable. I've never seen anything like it in my 30 years at this station. There is no record of what happened at the Crowe home that night. The next morning, though, Bartholomew showed up at Sheriff Morgan's office and demanded a more thorough investigation. He offered a large reward for information that would help find Evelyn and hired several men from nearby counties to help with the search. These search parties spent 2 weeks going through the woods around Alabama Pines. They pulled parts of the Coosa River and looked around old mines and hunting cabins that were no longer in use. There was no sign of Evelyn. Many people thought the search was strange because of how intense and widespread it was. The editor of the Alabama Pines Gazette wrote on November 30 that the resources Mr. Crowe has committed to locating his daughter exceed what might be expected, even from paternal devotion. One cannot help but wonder if there is not some additional motivation, perhaps knowledge of circumstances that would place the young woman in particular danger. People were even more suspicious of Bartholomew's behavior during the search. He personally led trips into the most remote areas, often going on by lantern light after everyone else had gone to bed. Jeremiah Wilkes, one of the men hired to help with the search, said Mr. Crowe would walk ahead of us, calling out, "Not Evelyn," as you might expect, but Adelaide. When Wilkes asked him about it, he looked at me like he'd seen a ghost and said he was just hoarse from shouting. The search was slowly given up as winter drew near. Bartholomew Crowe, who was getting more and more messy and angry, could often be seen walking around the property with a lantern, even during the day. Dr. Powell, who was called to the estate several times during this time, said that the household had become disorganized. His notes from December 1887 say, Mrs. Crowe is bedridden and refuses food and coherent conversation. Montgomery looks so nervous that he might collapse. Bartholomew refused to be examined, but shows signs of severe sleep deprivation and possible delusional thinking. Bartholomew's behavior became more and more erratic in early January 1888, which drew public attention. He showed up at the town council meeting and stopped it to accuse people he wouldn't name of hiding his daughter. When asked to explain who he thought was to blame, he reportedly looked at Sheriff Morgan and said, "Those who protect the guilty for a price." He was taken out of the meeting, but went home without any more trouble. 3 months after Evelyn went missing, on the 18th of January 1888, something was found that brought the case back to life. A group of hunters looking for deer near Blackwater Creek, which is about 4 miles from the Crowe estate, found a woman's shawl stuck in a bramble. Josephine Crowe said that the item belonged to her daughter. Sheriff Morgan set up another search of the area, but they didn't find anything else. The discovery of the shawl sparked new rumors. The family said they found it on the road to Mobile, but the place where it was found was in the opposite direction, which makes their story less believable. Also, Blackwater Creek went deeper into the wilderness and away from any established settlements. Why would Evelyn have gone this way, especially since winter was coming? A more troubling discovery was made in February 1888. While checking his lines along Blackwater Creek, a trapper found a ripped piece of cloth that looked like it came from a woman's underwear. What worried me more was that the material had what looked like dried blood stains on it. Sheriff Morgan took the item, but for some reason, no official analysis was ever done. The sheriff's office moved in 1890, and the fabric was put in the case file, where it was lost. By the spring of 1888, the case was completely stuck. The Crowe family became even more cut off from the rest of the world. Bartholomew never left the estate again. Montgomery took care of all business through written correspondence, which was delivered once a month by a messenger from Birmingham. During this time, no one saw Josephine. People who lived nearby noticed strange things happening at the estate. Chimneys let out smoke at strange times, even on warm spring nights. There were lights moving between the buildings all the time. Sometimes you could hear digging, but you couldn't see any improvements or plantings from the road. Bartholomew Crowe was briefly hospitalized in Birmingham in June 1888 after what Dr. Powell called an episode of violent delirium. Hospital records show that he was sedated for 5 days before being released into his brother's care. When he got back to Alabama Pines, the estate gates were permanently locked, and a sign warned people not to come in. In August 1888, almost a year after Evelyn went missing, things took another strange turn. There was a fire in the carriage house on the Crowe property. When neighbors saw the fire and came to help, the building was already completely on fire. No one from the family came out to help put out the fire. When volunteers finally got into the main house, they found it empty. The Crowes had left the estate and left behind most of their things. The fire itself made people suspicious. Ezekiel Thompson, the town's unofficial fire chief, wrote in his report that the fire seemed to have started in more than one place. "I've dealt with fires for 20 years. He wrote, "I've never seen a natural fire start in 3 different places at the same time. This was set on purpose, with enough coal oil to make sure the building was completely destroyed." There was no address to send it to. Bartholomew's business partners told us that he had sold all of his remaining assets weeks before. The family was gone just like Evelyn had been the fall before. The Crowe estate was empty for a few years because of legal problems. A Birmingham law firm kept paying the property taxes, but they wouldn't say who their client was. Kids in the area started to stay away from the property because they thought it was being watched or wrong. The house fell apart, the windows broke, the paint faded, and the gardens grew too big. The Alabama Pines Town Council voted to condemn the land in 1894. But before this could happen, a distant cousin of Bartholomew Crowe showed up with papers proving his claim to the estate. Vincent Crowe from Philadelphia set up the sale of the property to a development company. In 1895, the house was torn down and the land was split into smaller lots, but only a few of them were ever built on. During the demolition, workers found strange changes to the house that they hadn't seen while it was still occupied. A room on the 3rd floor had been heavily fortified with an extra lock on the door and metal plates bolted over the windows. The fire destroyed most of the floor in the carriage house, but it also showed signs of a newly built cellar that wasn't in the original property plans. The demolition company wrote down these findings, but they didn't look into them any further. If it weren't for a discovery made in 1923 while building a new road that connected Alabama Pines to the growing highway system, the mystery of Evelyn Crowe's disappearance might have been completely forgotten. Workers digging near what used to be the Crowe property's carriage house found human bones. The bones, which were found to belong to a woman between the ages of 20 and 30, were in what looked like a walled-off part of an old root cellar that had survived the demolition of the building above it. The coroner's report said that the remains had a fracture in the skull that was consistent with blunt force trauma. The skeleton's position was the most disturbing. Iron shackles were on the woman's wrists and ankles, which made it look like she had been chained up in the room. More digging showed that the cellar had been sealed off on purpose with a fake wall built to hide it. The room was about 6 feet by 4 feet, and the ceiling was too low for an adult to stand up straight. There were no personal items with the remains, which made it hard to figure out who they were. There was no clear evidence that the remains belonged to Evelyn Crowe. There weren't many dental records from that time, and no pictures of Evelyn have ever been found that could be compared to her bones. The investigation started up again for a short time, but it quickly came to a halt because of the passage of time and the Crowe family's disappearance. After the discovery, people in the area were briefly interested in the old case again. At that point, the Alabama Pines Gazette was a weekly paper with a small circulation. It published a series of articles about the Crowe family's home and Evelyn's disappearance. These articles made a number of older people come forward with more memories that had not been recorded during the first investigation. Martha Winters, who worked for the Crowe family as a laundress for a short time in 1881, told a strange story. "I was collecting linens from the upstairs rooms when I heard sobbing coming from behind a locked door. When I asked about it, Mrs. Crowe said it was her daughter, who was sick and needed to be alone for her own safety. I noticed that the linens from that room often had strange stains on them, some of which looked like blood." Josiah Kent, who had brought groceries to the estate as a child, said, "One time, when no one answered the kitchen door, I walked around to the side of the house. I saw the girl everyone called Evelyn in the garden. She was kneeling down and digging in the dirt with her bare hands. She had scratched a word into the soil that looked like help or home. But when she saw me watching, she quickly erased it. She had a wild look in her eyes that scared me." These late testimonies made people even more sure that the Crowe family had dark secrets. The case went cold again, though, because the main witnesses were long dead or missing, and the only physical evidence was unidentifiable remains. In 1947, while the Alabama State Historical Society was going through old documents, they found a bunch of letters that belonged to Dr. Harrison Powell, who had died in 1926. Powell and a co-worker in Boston wrote these letters to each other, and they included disturbing guesses about the Crowe family. In a letter from March 1889, Powell wrote, "My inquiries about the Crowe family have yielded troubling results. The Boston address they claimed as their former residence does not exist. The business connections Bartholomew mentioned cannot be verified. Most concerning is the complete absence of records pertaining to a daughter named Evelyn. I begin to wonder if the young woman was who they claimed she was at all." Dr. Samuel Whitaker, who wrote to Powell, gave him equally disturbing news. "Your suspicions match up with rumors that spread quickly in some Boston circles. Bartholomew Crowe was known here, but not in a good way. He left under a cloud of financial wrongdoing and possible criminal activity. There were rumors that he was involved with a young heiress who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, but nothing was ever proven. The young woman you describe as Evelyn looks a lot like the missing heiress, Adelaide Harrington." These letters made it seem like something much worse had happened than what had been thought before, that Evelyn Crowe was not Bartholomew's daughter at all, but a prisoner, maybe being held for money or to keep her from talking about a crime that had happened before. Harrison Mitchell, a journalist, wrote a series of articles in 1953 that looked into historical mysteries in the South. His work on the Crowe case led him to believe that it might be linked to a missing persons case in Savannah from 1879 that has never been solved. Adelaide Harrington, the 9-year-old daughter of a well-known merchant, went missing on her way to see family. James Harrington, her father, spent years looking for her and following leads in several states. Mitchell got copies of the original missing persons report that was filed in Savannah. Adelaide Harrington was described as 19 years old, about 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight build, dark brown hair, and blue eyes. She was last seen wearing a gray traveling suit and carrying a small valise. She had a small birthmark below her left ear and a childhood injury that made the little finger of her right hand slightly bent. Mitchell noticed that this James Harrington looked a lot like the stranger who had confronted Montgomery Crowe at the Pines Inn months before Evelyn went missing. Could Harrington have finally found his daughter at Alabama Pines, only to be turned away by her captors? Mitchell found a police report from a small town 30 miles north of Alabama Pines in November 1887 after doing a lot of research. A man who was tentatively identified as James Harrington was found dead in the woods, apparently as a result of a hunting accident. The situation was strange. Harrington had no known reason to be hunting in the area. He didn't own any guns, and the wound that killed him was in his back. But the local police decided the death was an accident because they didn't have the money to do a full investigation. The timing, which was only a few weeks after Evelyn went missing, made it seem like there might be a link. Did Harrington find out the truth about his daughter, only to die while trying to find her captors? Mitchell's investigation came to a halt when he couldn't find any living members of the Crowe or Harrington families. His last article ended with this sobering statement: "Whatever dark truth lies at the heart of the Crowe mystery, it seems that those who knew it have taken it to their graves. The bones under the carriage house may be all that is left of a young woman, either Evelyn Crowe or Adelaide Harrington, whose true story will probably never be fully known. For a long time, the case was inactive. As the timber industry fell apart and younger people moved to bigger cities for work, Alabama Pines itself slowly fell apart. By the 1962nd, it was just a group of buildings around a crossroads, and the forest was taking back land that had been cleared. Workers found a sealed compartment inside an old filing cabinet while they were fixing up the Baldwin County Courthouse in 1968. The journal inside had yellowed pages and a cracked and stained leather cover. Montgomery Crowe was written inside. It seems that someone put the journal in the courthouse before the family went missing in 1888, but we don't know who or why. County officials sent the document to the state archives in Montgomery, where it stayed mostly untouched until 1969, when historian Dr. Elizabeth Chambers started making a list of things related to Alabama after the Civil War. Dr. Chambers found something in Montgomery's journal that upset him. The entries, which were written between 1882 and 1887, showed that Bartholomew was becoming more and more controlling and unpredictable in the home. Montgomery said that his brother was full of doubts and was determined to keep the family line clean. The most worrying parts were the ones that mentioned Evelyn, who Montgomery kept calling the prisoner instead of his niece. The journal says that Evelyn had really been Adelaide Harrington, who was taken on Bartholomew's orders while she was traveling in 1879. It seems that money was the reason for this crime. Bartholomew had put a lot of money into Harrington's shipping business, and when Harrington found out that Bartholomew had stolen money, he was going to go broke. The kidnapping was meant to make Harrington stop looking into the case. An entry dated August 12, 1882 reads, "B has received word that Harrington continues his search despite the financial ruin it brings him." B seems almost to admire the man's persistence, though it threatens us all. The girl remains our only leverage, yet keeping her has become an increasing burden. J has grown strangely attached to her, treating her as the daughter she never had, while I live in constant fear of discovery. Montgomery wrote, "B never intended to keep her this long. The original plan was a swift resolution, but when Harrington proved more stubborn than anticipated, the temporary measure became permanent. The girl has been here so long now that Josephine has begun to treat her as a daughter in truth, albeit one kept under constant surveillance." The journal talked about all the steps that were taken to keep Evelyn Adelaide from escaping or being found, like bolting the shutters on her windows, locking the doors from the outside, and giving her sedatives when visitors came. Montgomery's anxiety about the situation grew, but he seemed too scared of his brother to do anything about it. A particularly troubling entry from March 1885 talks about an escape attempt, disaster narrowly avoided. The girl was able to take the hinges off her door at night and get to the ground by tying bed sheets together. B found her missing during his nightly check and tracked her into the woods. She was brought back unconscious after hitting her head during the struggle. Dr. Powell must not be called, even though J is worried about concussion. B has moved her to the reinforced room in the attic and stays with her all the time. The last entries from September and early October 1887 talk about how the tension in the house was growing. Bartholomew had gone to New Orleans, leaving Montgomery and Josephine to watch over their prisoner. Somehow, James Harrington found them in Alabama Pines and confronted Montgomery. Montgomery denied knowing where Adelaide was, but it was clear that he was shaken by the encounter. Harrington came to the inn on October 3rd and asked questions about a young woman who looked like A. He had a picture with him. It's only a matter of time before someone puts the pieces together. I told B by telegram to come back right away, but he says he can't leave his business at this important time. J is showing signs of stress. I've caught her crying outside A's door twice, whispering apologies through the wood. The entry from October 16th, the day before Evelyn's reported disappearance, was the most disturbing. J came to me in distress this evening. She claims E has been writing letters, though how she managed to get paper and pen is unclear. J discovered an attempt to communicate with someone outside, perhaps Harrington. B will be furious when he returns. I'm afraid of what might happen. That was the end of the journal. The next page was missing, so there was no record of what happened on October 17th, the day Evelyn went missing. Dr. Chambers tried to find any living members of the Harrington family to tell them what she had found, but she was not able to do so. In 1969, she wrote an academic article about the case for a regional historical journal, but it didn't get much attention outside of academic circles. Her research notes show that she planned to look into the matter more, but she died suddenly from a stroke in early 1970, which ended the investigation. The land where the Crowe estate used to be stayed empty, creating a gap in the landscape as the areas around it slowly became more modern. People in the area stayed away from it because they felt uneasy for no clear reason. In 1977, a plan to build a community center on the site was dropped after workers kept reporting problems with the equipment and an unexplained unwillingness to stay on the property after dark. Carlton Hayes, a worker, told the local newspaper, "I've been in construction for 30 years and never felt anything like it. The place feels wrong, like you're being watched from all sides. My crew would start to feel sick around midday every day, headaches, nausea. The equipment would break down for no reason. One day, when I got back from lunch, I found my work gloves arranged in the shape of a cross, even though I was alone on site. I told the developer he couldn't pay me enough to keep working." A bad storm in 1982 knocked down an old oak tree that used to be near the Crowe carriage house. This revealed a small metal box that had been buried among its roots. Inside were a tarnished silver locket with a curl of dark hair, a folded handkerchief with the initials A.H. sewn on it, and a piece of paper that looked like it was part of a letter. The ink was faded but still readable. "If this reaches you, know that I am being held against my will at a place called Alabama Pines. The family name is Crowe, but they call me Evelyn, which is not my real name. I fear my father may never have stopped looking, and if he comes here, they will." The rest of the letter was missing. The discovery brought the case back into the news for a short time. The items were given to the State Historical Society, where they still are. Forensic analysis showed that the handwriting matched samples from Adelaide Harrington's school essays that her former teacher in Savannah kept. There was no more evidence found when the area where the box was found was looked into more closely. Ground-penetrating radar surveys done in 1983 found some strange things under the soil near the old carriage house, but digging only found debris from the 1895 demolition. The most recent event in this long-dormant mystery happened in 1989, when an older woman named Margaret Pickett got in touch with the Baldwin County Historical Society. She said she was the granddaughter of Amos Pickett, who worked as a groundskeeper for the Crowe family for a short time in the 1882nd. Margaret says that her grandfather told her father something that upset him, and her father then told her. On the night of the 17th of October, 1887, the night Evelyn went missing, Amos saw something. He had taken a shortcut that went by the Crowe property on his way back from a late-night errand in town. He saw Montgomery and Josephine Crowe carrying what looked like a wrapped package from the main house to the carriage house in the dark. The package was about the same size as a person. There were more details in Margaret Pickett's account that had not been recorded before. Her grandfather said that he had been hiding behind a tree and watching as the two of them went into the carriage house. Josephine came out alone after a few minutes, looking very upset. Montgomery came next, carrying a pick and shovel. Josephine tried to get back to the main house, but Montgomery grabbed her arm and made her go to the back of the carriage house with him. There, in the dark, they started to dig. Amos didn't want to look into it any further because he was already uneasy about the strange things he had seen while working at the estate. He left Alabama Pines a few days later and moved his family to Tennessee. He never told anyone what he saw because he was afraid of what would happen. Margaret Pickett's story supports the idea that Evelyn Adelaide died at the hands of her captors, probably because she tried to reach out to the outside world. The remains found in 1923 were almost certainly hers, and they were probably hidden quickly because they were afraid Bartholomew would come back and the police would look into it. What happened to Josephine and Montgomery after they left Alabama Pines? Margaret Pickett gave one last piece of information that her grandfather had passed down. Amos thought he saw Josephine Crowe on a riverboat going to New Orleans while visiting family in Memphis in 1892. The woman had a lot of veils on, but when the wind blew them up for a second, he recognized her face, even though she looked a lot older than she should have after only a few years. She had a weak man with her, who might have been Montgomery, But Amos couldn't be sure. He didn't go up to them. We still don't know what happened to Bartholomew Crowe. There are no clear records of what he did after that or when he died. Some people think he might have left the country for good, maybe to South America or Europe, where he had business ties. In 1993, a historian looking into American expats in Argentina found a newspaper article from 1901 about the suicide of an American businessman in Buenos Aires. The man, whose name was only B.C., jumped out of his hotel window after getting a letter from the U.S. The timing and initials, while not conclusive, suggest a possible link to our mystery. The tale of Evelyn Crowe, or Adelaide Harrington, serves as a grim reminder of the most terrible parts of human nature. The ability to be cruel for a long time, the lengths people will go to avoid the consequences of their actions, and the way evil can hide behind respectable appearances. Alabama Pines is now just a note on historical maps. The forests have taken back a lot of what used to be a busy community. The Crowe estate is still empty, with a clearing in the pines where nothing seems to grow well. People in the area still stay away after dark. Some people say they heard things on quiet nights, like footsteps on a wooden floor where there is no building, or, even worse, the sound of someone crying. Maybe it's just the wind in the pines, or maybe it's something else, the echo of a young woman who disappeared into history, whose real name was almost lost, and whose story might never have been told. What is certain is that there are secrets buried deep in the ground of Alabama pines that were never meant to be found. Some were found by chance or circumstance. Others may still be hidden, known only to those who died long ago and took their guilt with them to the grave.